first of all, what I want to touch on is this idea of the e-collar, the prong collar, the slip lead or anything like that being solely an aversive tool.
Ooh, and right off the rip, he starts with the worst possible argument that you could ever throw at a force-free trainer, which is, well, these aren't aversive tools, or they're not always aversive. Guys, come on. Let's stop pandering to the force-free community. And I asked even Blake about it. I was like, is the e-collar? He's like, the e-collar is a fucking aversive tool, right? Like, I think we all know deep inside of our brain that the e-collar is an aversive tool. Now, when he says always used as an aversive tool, let me tell you what he's referring to. One of two things. One would be an accurate representation of what he just said. The other would be a fake representation of what he said, right? So what a lot of people mean when they say it's not an aversive tool is they mean that it's not used solely as a punishment tool, which could be accurate, right? Again, as we're using aversives, we could use an aversive as positive punishment or negative reinforcement. Positive punishment is what most people think of when they think of the big correction for something. Negative reinforcement is a reinforcement. So it increases behavior, but it's still using an aversive, right? It is still aversive to the dog, which is why the dog wants to escape it by doing something. Again, I've used the example, if I want to teach a dog to get onto a bed, or let's say teach a dog to come to me for off-leash reliability, which is what a lot of people use the e-collar for, right? I could engage stimulation. When the dog turns to come to me, I could turn off stimulation. That doesn't always need to be at a very high level. Sometimes it could be at a fairly low level, but it's still working because the dog is aversive by it.
Yep.
Right? So that's what a lot of people, when they say that, mean, right? Is we use it for negative reinforcement. We don't use it for positive punishment. Or we use it primarily for negative reinforcement, not positive punishment, which again, if we're using it as negative reinforcement, that is a little bit more quote unquote fair to the dog in the teaching stages because we're increasing behavior. We're using it to make the dog want to do something more, even though they're wanting to do it more by avoiding something. Whatever. The second thing that they mean, so that would be the example of when he said it's not always an aversive tool. That would be incorrect still. It's still an aversive tool in that setting. When they say that it's not always an aversive tool, the accurate thing would be they're using the e-collar as a signal, right? So what do I mean by that, right? I could take an e-collar sensation that you feel, but you are not aversive by, right? Meaning you're not motivated by it independently to do anything. You don't want to escape it. You don't want to avoid it, right? And I could pair that neutral sensation that you're not aversive by with something positive, right? Meaning I apply neutral stimulation and then I give you a treat. I apply neutral sensation and I give you a treat, right? So you're using the e-collar like a command. You're using it like I say sit. You're using it like I say yes. You're using it like I give a hand command. Whatever, right? To which then the force-free argument to that is if it's a neutral sensation and the dog is not independently motivated by it, why even use it? Why would I even need to use an e-collar if it in itself is not aversive? I could use anything in the world. You could use a vibrate-only collar then at that point, right? You could use a collar that literally only makes a noise if you're concerned about being able to communicate from a distance with your dog, which is what a lot of people say. But you would want to make sure that tool can never be aversive to the dog then at that point. Right? And again, Ivan has talked about this before in a podcast episode that he did with Larry Crone, arguing basically the same thing, where Larry was trying to say the e-collar is not an aversive tool. The e-collar is not an aversive tool, where Ivan said, if you're using it in the fashion he's discussing, which is you're creating a positive association with that sensation, if you then later need to use it as an aversive, meaning I need to get you to want to avoid this thing, because I've conditioned a positive association with that sensation, it causes me to need to use an even more aversive sensation than I otherwise would have needed because the dog likes it, right?
Yeah.
They're not as inclined to want to avoid it. Where if I've never used it in the signal fashion, where I'm pairing it with positive reinforcement and making the dog essentially like the sensation, the dog inherently will always see it as an aversive and will want to avoid it, meaning I could use a lower level. And there was studies that Ivan brought up basically utilizing mice and cheese. So basically what they did is they had a mouse go to get some cheese. And they had, I think, like an electrified platform that the mouse would get onto, right, to get the cheese. And when paired that electric sensation with the cheese repeatedly, when they tried to get the dog to then avoid the cheese, they wound up needing to use a substantially higher level to get them to stop than a mouse that they never used the low sensation paired with the cheese. They just went right away to a slightly higher one to get the dog to avoid it.
Mouse.
That was a mouse, yeah.
Yeah.
So, did I say dog?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So, whatever. So right off the rip, 1 minute and 11 seconds into it, very bad argument to start.